Welcome back to the Developer Success Podcast. This is the second episode. Today our guest is Soumitra Bhattacharyya. Really excited to be having you here. I got in touch with you after you published a blog post about the multi-gateway dev portal that you helped to create for Ikea. From what you've shared with us and like a little bit of an introduction we had just a second ago, this is not your first rodeo, so you've got a lot of experience in the industry. Like you said, like 10 years in the integration developments, started with SOAP, Oracle integration for batch data, CDC. You've been working with API management last couple of years, or actually quite a couple of years already. So you're working as a lead engineer and solution architect in the Ikea, which is Ikea Retail, I believe, API management team that hosts central API gateways and that manage the API catalog in the developer portal. As you told us, your core focus is REST APIs, but you're also working with GraphQL, RPC APIs. And then apart from the API management platform, you're also involved in the building of the API ecosystem. That includes creating and maintaining Oracle-level API standards, introducing hybrid choice of gateways, both edge and on-prem clouds, bringing simplified and enriched API provider and API consumer experiences with the dev portal, and API management infra APIs. And like that's already a really long, very impressive list. It continues. So you've have exposure with different gateway solutions like IBM API-C, Kong, Gravity, and Akamai. So that's a lot of stuff. Welcome to the podcast, Soumitra.
Thanks, Kristof. Thanks for your invitation. I'm really appreciate to be part of this session with you.
So I got a lot of questions. In our dev portal practice, so as consultants building developer portals, we often get asked about multi-gateway dev portals, and we've learned that means different things for different people. So I'm very curious to hear what it means for you. Also, I'd love to hear about your experiences with developer success and what does developer success mean for you?
Okay, so to me, like the developer success is basically it's a combination of a couple of factors.
Mm-hmm.
One is like fulfillment of the technical objective, because of course the first thing is basically a technical thing. Like you are as a consumer of an API, you like to have the technical goal needs to be fulfilled properly. That's the first and foremost thing. And when I say the technical goal is of course like the API that you are consuming, it should serve the technical purpose. Let's say the SL you have, the data you are wanting should be written proper data, the performance, all those kind of technical aspects. But on top of that, the overall end user the experience, like for example, to start with the onboarding to a dev portal, the whole journey, starting from the onboarding to get your first API subscribe, and overall the total life cycle, let's say when the API evolves, when there is a new version, how do you communicate? When there is an outage, how do you communicate it? So overall life cycle on API management, that how enriched you are. So that's one of the key aspects. Mm-hmm. And on top of that, the business objective, because end of the day, all the technical thing is basically evolved for a business, like it served a business purpose. So the business purpose for both sides, the API owner or the API consumer, it should basically serve the purpose. So overall, this is all about the developer success to me.
Mm-hmm. How hard or how easy is it to get the business success part? Because I know in the API industry, we very often get carried away just looking at the technical stuff. And then often teams have difficulties actually getting business people involved because they don't understand APIs. Because like I had a call with one customer who is basically saying like, yeah, our business team doesn't want to sell APIs. And I was like, okay, that's interesting. And I think it's probably because they don't fully understand how it works and what's the real value. But how hard have you found that in the past? Is it something that you've had to struggle to explain to people, or that's quite okay in the organizations that you've been working in?
In my organization, I can say like we are in evolving state. So even a couple of years back, we are completely all the integration is basically kind of a point-to-point integration based on the SOAP services. And then we're starting our digitalization journey. And we started with like the democratizing of data. So let's all the data be freed up. let's create a service, let's create an API on top of all those data and services. So we are still in the journey. We have 2 miles to go before we say like we are completely successful. So how I say is basically the mindset change. That is probably the key thing, because when you talk to developers, they are quite good at describe their problems in a technical way. So they know how to write APIs, they know how to create a well-performant API. But the end goal of an API is not all about the technical thing, like the business goal. So until unless the developer himself or herself understand the business objective of their APIs, how that will empower the end user to create a business relationship with you. And it's not always like, though we have the dev portal right now, it's basically internal only. So it's only the internal team. We have 100 of engineering teams, so they actually expose the API and other teams are actually consume the API. But we are also looking for a solution that for partner integration, as well as probably in near future is kind of a for public as well. But as you said, like it's quite common that the most difficult challenge is basically the business objective, like how to meet the business and technical go and it should go hand to hand. Or maybe I can repeat again. So the main challenge is like how to sync the business objective with the technical implementation, so it actually enrich the overall user experience. And for my organizations, that's also a challenge, I'll say. We are working to mitigate that part. And as I said, like the foremost is basically the education or the awareness among the different engineering teams that they should think from the business point of view as well when they use the API. So that will actually give the final success factor of an API or a developer success actually.
I'm at risk of getting a little bit of sidetracked, but you piqued something that I've been actually this morning was writing about, which is the difference between internal APIs, like the business success for internal APIs and the business success for external APIs. And do you see that clearly? Last year, we did a lot of research and we had some interviews around complexity. And one of the speakers we had on the API Resilience podcast, Jay Bloom, he has this model for different ways that teams work depending on if they're working on an economy of scope, an economy of scale, or an economy of differentiation object or deliverable. So one of the things that he was talking about is that APIs, because they're assets that become better from reuse. So like the more you use them, the better they become. So they're like the perfect example of an economy of scope asset. But then I've been which is helping to couple economy of scale and economy of differentiation. But then I was thinking about this, that like this holds true internally for internal efforts, because there it really is as much reuse as you possibly can. It does not really matter. You don't even want to start metering in a lot of cases, not always. Like I've seen some differences, but when you're going outside, it becomes different, because there you want to capture some of the value that you're creating. Do you see that difference already? Is that already happening for you also, or?
Yeah, so as I said, like we don't have this kind of truly public API right now, but we are already started thinking about it. Yeah. So for example, we recently introduced the API standard, and we are planning to measure all the published API based on the standard. So that's one of the things that we're working. And the reason is basically in internal API, like most of the teams, they know each other. So if they doubt, they can easily can communicate to each other. They can get that doubt clarified. But when you're actually exposing your API to the partner, when you probably don't have any physical interaction between the consumer and the API writer, or maybe when it's public, then the whole game is becoming more critical in terms of quality, in terms of how you productize your API, what is the monetization plan. So those things will come into picture. So for example, you need to make sure that the API specification is not only have a very good quality, but if you think about like when they subscribe your API, is it a single API or is it a combination of multiple API that gives you your overall value? That's probably the cases actually. So how do you basically group them? when they subscribe your API, is it a subscription as a single API or they're subscribing to as a product? Like how you manage those kind of subscription, and more importantly, how the feedback loop is basically, it's kind of a two-way of communication. Like you should let them know like what is happening to your API, how your versioning strategy is. Similarly, they should know like what they can expect from this API. Of course, you should know those kind of feedback loop is critical. So how I see is basically when it is internal API, things are quite easy because it's kind of it's open discussion forum. You know each other. Like, most of the API owner, API consumer know each other. But when you are going to the next level, and in another aspect is basically when you are internal API, people see it more as a technical object or technical entity. But when you go to the other aspect, they are pretty much cautious. Like if it is giving the required business value, if they use it, what is the life cycle? What is the end result of the API? How long this API going to stay? Because they have to invest on those API if they want to consume. So they have to be, confident enough that this API not only serve their business value in a short term, but they should have a proper evolving business scenarios in the future as well. So those will be coming to the picture. So it's of course a huge effort has to be put into if you have only internal portal, to make it as a true external or maybe a partner. So those are the X factor that you have to apply on the internal portal to make it as a better external portal.
Yeah, makes sense. Let's go back in time a little bit, because you've worked on a range of different fields. Like you've seen the API ecosystem evolve through the years. And how, like if you would describe the ecosystem back then, like when you just got started in your career, how has it changed in this more than 10 years that you've been working with APIs?
So I actually have seen quite a lot of transitions in between. So initially, let's say even 8 or 9 years back, or even 6-7 years back, it's mostly SOAP-based web services. So we have a different tools from Oracle, IBM, and we build integration. And most of the integration is basically point-to-point integrations. And there is no true sense of API. In that sense, actually, there is no dev portal. Of course, there was the registry or kind of a integration catalog, but that's far away from what you say dev portal in true sense actually. And then I know my organization as well as other organizations, they almost started the API journey a couple of years back, 4, 5, 6. And if you see like the overall general API management ecosystem landscape, I think 4 or 5 years back, the number of API gateways, they are also start evolving along with all the API management tools, not only the gateway, let's say the dev portal, API security. And now if you see, like 6 years back, I think you have a handful API gateway providers, but right now there is lots of API gateway providers, API security providers, sort of them. So it was quite a lot. Like in our organization, we started the digitalization journey a couple of years back. And we started about 2 major initiatives. One is how to democratize data, like to free up all the data that is there in database in some form of data. And CDC tooling is one of the key aspects to make sure that data is immediately freed up from the database. And another one is basically invest heavy on the API technologies or API management thing. And we started with our API management platform 4 or 5 years back. And we had IBM API Connect, and it was a kind of a single solution for full API management or full API ecosystem, you can say. Like the same one solution is the same IBM API Connect that manages the API manager, API gateway, the portal. And then we started thinking about introducing other gateway solutions to support a variety of use cases. And then we found that we needed something vendor agnostic dev portal, because not one dev portal can serve all the purpose like one. So we have to have some kind of a bit dev portal that is not fixed to a particular technology that a particular API provider provides. It supports multiple API gateways, for example, as well as it has to be closely linked with the business technology that we have. So how I basically map all the domain-specific terminologies of grouping with the APIs. For example, we have a different systems, we have different teams, different organizational unit. How we can map them to address this kind of challenges? We need to have this kind of vendor agnostic dev portal where we can customizedly tag all those API to all those different business-oriented tagging or filtering or customizing, and so in a better way, so you can relate those APIs more close to the business rather than just a only technical API. So that's the evolution journey, you can say.
So the big evolution is from basically technology islands to more holistic view across the organization, where you can give visibility about like that is not that you don't structure APIs by where is it managed, but that you're structuring it by what part of the organization is it part of. And
right. Earlier it was completely managed by the technical point of view. Let's say it's either REST or GraphQL, something like that. But now we are actually managed based on the business unit or business terminology. So that's the change, major change in the last 2-3 years. That's it.
So, and are you using your dev portal only for then all these different API assets, or do you also use it for other things?
Yeah, and actually our dev portal, as you know, that we are actually using the Backstage in the dev portal, and it's not the good thing about the Backstage is like it's more than just API dev portal. So it has a software catalog. It has a you can basically publish different kind of software things or services. Let's say you have a different onboarding to different, let's say onboarding to Git, onboarding to some security tools. So everything is managed by that way. Also, it's we used as a tech documentation. So earlier we have a different portal, different UI to manage technical documentation, onboarding, different portals, but we just wanted to combine it in a single. And one of the key component of our dev portal is basically API catalog or API developer portal, you can say. We also use it as a kind of for different plugin development. So for each platform team, we have a different plugin. So where you can basically get onboarded to the platforms, get access, create your own pipelines based on all the automation script available in this platform. So it's actually more than just API developer portal. We have other purposes as well here.
Do you do inner sourcing at Ikea?
So we have the inner sourcing here. So we basically, it's a kind of a co-development thing. So it's the different teams who are actually contributing to the same repository of dev portal. Actually.
Yeah. So and they're also on the dev portal.
They're also on the portal. Yes.
Yeah, very, very cool. It was fascinating to see, and I imagine that the Backstage community is very much intertwined with the inner sourcing world. So, well, actually already here. So we have the API program, a shift from technology islands to more holistic kind of building blocks.
Yes.
Also inner sourcing that comes on top of that. That sounds like you have like a drive to build a platform for the organization that's everybody can use, and that's like a shared platform for development. So this sounds like several mind shifts that have happened and that are probably still happening in the organization. What's the most interesting mind shift that you've seen that's the dev portal helped to kind of like trigger in the organization?
I think the API first.
API first?
Approach is probably the most important factor, actually. And I'll say we're still working on that to make sure that it's basically thoroughly become part of the DNA of the organization, actually, this API first approach. So when you started earlier, it was not the case. So we used to develop APIs just for on request basis. Let's say if some team needs some API, there is no other form of integration, so we developed the API. But gradually we started thinking about that API is not on-demand thing. If you have owned the data, you own the service, expose it as API. And this API first approach actually is kind of a mindset that can vary in different level for different teams. So some teams could be quite mature enough to understand this API standard, how they treat their product as how they expose their product as API. There are teams who are from different mindset, so they are still gaining up this, the mindset how to make all the product as API first. So what I found is basically that maturity level of different teams are not same due to different factor. Actually, you cannot generalize it. But our objective as a platform or as the API enabler is basically to make sure that this mindset, this API first or design first concept is basically getting into their best practices every time. Like every time they think about any solution, they should think about like, I should think about API first, because that actually heavily break the silos, the way of their working. Also, if they think about the consumer point of view, that if I build a product, who is the consumer? I can imagine the consumer immediately. If I think about I have to develop API, I know that how I need to expose it, what kind of performance, what kind of security things I need to consider. So things will be much more simplified if you think about the API first approach. And probably that is the most important factor that we are actually investing. And this is the most critical factor that we have been evolving in our organization, the API first mindset actually.
How easy is it to get like senior management onto the API first bandwagon?
Actually, the good thing is like all our senior management knows this thing actually, and they are actually investing here. So they are pushing back to the individual developer that you should focus on the API first. And that's a really great thing about our organization is basically we get a solid support from our top level organization, our top level management. And we can actually invest a lot on this API. I mean, it's all possible because the top management knows about the beauty of the API first approach, and that's why they're pushing towards it actually too much.
Cool.
Yeah.
So you said earlier that I think you already hinted at it, that before you built this new backstage portal, that you had like a fragmented landscape with multiple portals. Can you maybe talk a little bit about how that was, and like what were the pain points that triggered you to go to a single portal? Was it really a pain point that you saw, or was it more like management saying like, this is crazy, we have too many of these, or was it like people bottom up saying like, I can't find anything here? Or what were the main drivers for to start a centralized portal?
Yeah. So the thing is like we had a centralized API gateway or API management solution. So the idea was like if you want to be part of the central API gateway, then you can be part of the central catalog or central dev portal. But let's say we have an n number of APIs. It's only in by 5 number of APIs are part of the central API gateway. So that means we are actually losing 80% of APIs which are not part of central API gateway. They are automatically not part of central API catalog, because there is no other way to inject all those APIs to the central API catalog or central like main dev portal. So our purpose was basically to make sure that you give a complete segregation of API dev portal from the rest of the API ecosystem, let's say the gateway. So it should be loose couple. So there is no hard and fast rule that you have to be in central API gateway to be part of the central API catalog. So that was our first aim. So we just basically decouple these two components. And there are many use cases where the API could not be run on the central API gateway. There is some limitation, some constant is there. Let's say they're running on other platform or some other gateway that is managed by that particular team due to some reason or some constant. So then we started a kind of a automated publishing or like some pipeline, so they can start publishing their specification or APIs to a central catalog in some uniform way. And how it actually helped us. So if you imagine like, if you are not part of a central gateway, then of course somehow you have to manage some internal portal so that you can share the specification to your consumer. It could be normal documentation in Confluence, or it could be some other UI. But as a consumer, if you are actually looking for some solution, some API, then just imagine the pain, like you have to search lots of places to find the particular API specification or APIs, and it will not have a uniform experience for you. Like you never know like how the specification will look like, how the onboarding, how the access, everything is completely different. So that part we actually try to mitigate. The problem is basically to have a consolidated location where everybody can publish the spec without being part of the central API gateway, so that every specification or all the API can be found in the same catalog. So that's the, and we are still not we're still not reached the goal. It's an ongoing process, but I think we are in the right track.
Why did you choose Backstage? Like, what's the story behind that?
Yeah. So as I said, like, we are looking for a solution that's to build a vendor-neutral dev portal, and so the central API management team, we started investing how we can, should we develop something by our own, or should we buy something, or is there any tool available? And there are other initiatives in the organizations where they are looking for some software catalog, or let's say central portal for all kind of documentation, all kind of software catalog, like everything in a single portal. And then we found that the Backstage is basically a very good fit to address our challenges or the solution you're looking for. Backstage is a good fit. And then we started exploring the Backstage, and we found that it has a huge flexibility, like whatever you want to build on top of it, it gives you the flexibility. It has a huge community, as well as lots of plugin that is available. So for example, we have OpenAPI, we have a async API, we also have the GraphQL. So all the plugins are already available. So when you need to build the UI for them, it's all automatically there. Then the system mapping, the group, or for example, the teams in Azure Active Directory, for example, if you need to map like who owns the API and which API is tagged to which system, all those metadata or the soft tagging is already available in Allen. So you can easily do that instead of inventing the same wheel again and again. And that was the main reason why we are using the Backstage, actually. And as I said, like, Backstage is basically for purely our internal portal. So that's why it's basically beyond the API dev portal. So it has other thing as well.
Yeah.
So serves kind of as a good internal portal.
Yeah. So that it's not just an API portal, it is really a true internal developer portal. I have an interesting question, which is based on our own exposure. We built potentially multi-gateway portals in Drupal. One thing that we've realized is multi-gateway means different things for different people. So there's the level of the catalog, so like being able to have everything, like all the different types of APIs from whatever gateway in one place. It might be about pulling API specifications from systems so that you can aggregate them, but that's often harder. And also, it might be easier to just set up a pipeline to push from the different systems into the portal. And then there's key generation. And kind of like key management and having a central place where you can provision your keys. Do you have key management also in Backstage already, or this is something that's still coming later?
We are mostly working on this BRR token-based API security. So the API security part is basically handed over to the enterprise IM team. So they manage is based on the IDP provider they have. So we don't have the key management or key generation system in the dev portal. So even if you need API key, not the BRR token, you can still create the similar client registration in the IDP and use the only client ID, not the BRR token. So that's the possibility. But yeah, I know that that's the one challenge. And also what I found is more critical is basically the subscription model or the API security model for different gateways is different. So for example, some gateway supports the API level subscription. Like if you subscribe the API, you subscribe all the operation in it. Some APIs basically have, like some gateway providers, like you have to subscribe per endpoint specific. So their access control is like there. For example, IBAPI Connect earlier we had, it's basically combination of more than one APIs and under a product, subscribe to that. So it's completely different to different model. And I think that's the quite important challenge. If we build a dev portal that's supposed to different gateway, and every gateway has a different subscription or security model, then how we can have a generic solution that supports all those things.
Do you do try it out functionality in the portal?
Yes. So that's part of the OpenAPI specification tryout section. So you just authorize your API. Once you have the authorization, you just pass your API key or token, and then you can just try it out. So just make a live call to the gateway and get a response. But we don't have anything right now that's called free plan. So to try it out, you first have to subscribe it,
You still
and
have to
then
subscribe.
then you can try it out.
Cool. What the main purpose is for the API program, and how you know if it is succeeding at that purpose. You talked about API first. As I heard, it's kind of like evolving and still more and more complex.
It's a kind of a wide list of factors that we're actually working on. Of course, one is like to democratize the data and the process. So everybody has access to all the process available in the organization, all the data, business data. Then to provide a complete API ecosystem to expose your data in form. So you need to think about how to secure the API, how to show the API. So that's why you have the full ecosystem portal. Then it's basically, as I said, like to create umbrella that covers all the APIs in the list. So you need to find to different portal, different pages to find the API. Everything should be found under a single portal. That's the thing. We're also, another goal is serve the portal is basically, you can say, it actually mitigates the API duplication. So for example, if you don't find your API, probably like to create another one, which might already created by another team. So that API duplication is quite a good, like it's a kind of a problem in every organization, you can say, like if it doesn't have the transparency.
And how do you address that? Because it's a really difficult problem, right? Because even if people can't find APIs, it's so tempting to just start coding and just create your own API. Is that, do you have that problem, or you have been able to address that?
We have the problem, actually, you can say. But the way we're trying to address is basically, I think the major triggering point of this problem is basically not able, if you have a lack of knowledge that APIs already exist. That's the problem, the main risk, essentially. And if you have the flat structure of API catalog, let's say you just go there and see there is a 500 APIs, probably you will not able to, and if the API is not properly named, let's say if you're not able to find it properly, let's say you just search with some string or some phrase, you can return. The searching capability is not that good due to the proper API title or not proper API, or there is no proper description that returning with the search result based on this phrase. So how we are planning to mitigate is basically we are categorizing all the API based on the practice or the domain or the organization that you have. So for an example, let's say we have, for example, a domain called customer that handles our customer-related data, customer-related operations, for example. And if you like to know like what all the APIs there are for that domain, because before you probably create one, you'd like to have a look like what kind of data or APIs they're already exposing. You can do searching based on the particular domain or the architectural area. So that's quite easy search, actually, because you know like where to search and like how to sort in the list of APIs you're looking for, actually. Instead of 500, now we have let's say 20 APIs that you have to look into. That is one of the approaches that we're looking. So, I mean, grouping all the APIs in such a way that not only, that's what I already said earlier, like instead of having a technical point of view, I wanted to bring the business grouping of all the APIs. So, like, this is something is basically the list of APIs that is there for that particular domain. If it is not there, we'll also have a tagging of who is the owner. So the person to contact, like, then you can check physically, like, I'm looking for develop an API, but it's related to this data concept or this architectural area. So if you have something, then let us know. If you don't have something, then a probably will build. Another way is basically, earlier we had even now we have a thing like if you have one API that is already in production or that's already developed, and that means its runtime is ready, then only you're going to publish the API. But we're also planning to bring a draft version API. So let's say if you are done with the design only, let's say you just design the API, and let's say it takes 6 months or 5 months, 3 months to develop, you should not wait till then. You just immediately publish the API in the portal in a draft mode. So others should expect that, yeah, okay, this is the API already there. Maybe it's not in production, but it's coming there. So you can also plan accordingly. So it will also helps to mitigate the reduplication, because you know that's already there. Somebody is already working on that part, as well as it will also help the consumer to start working on this thing, because they have the specification with them. So they can also parallelly start working the code to consume the API itself. So
makes sense. So, and are you using like domain modeling? Have you already done domain modeling in the organization? So then you probably are going to reuse that for
exactly.
For
so the domain modeling we have the data concept modeling. So let's say if you have a particular flow that you know that this is part of this flow, so you can also tag your API based on that one. So there is a different kind of modeling we're using, domain architectural data concept. So everything is basically tagged with an API.
What kind of metrics do you use to measure success of the dev portal, and or more generally developer success? Do you have metrics for that already, or?
No, there is no so-called measurable metrics that we have. But if you say like for example, for developer success, I mean, I think theoretically we can say like the time to production, for example, if they start with this, if they plan to consume an API, so to get onboarded, to get an access, to successfully try out some APIs and move their code to the production, like that timeline, that probably can be one measurable unit probably, but we don't have right now actually. But yeah, that's kind of my wild thought actually.
Because I've been one of our partners, Bhattacharyya, they're specialized in developer metrics. So they do, they're not so much focused on API metrics right now, although that they work with similar stacks. And but they're really popular in the inner source space. So on one of the things that I theoretically have been thinking about, but I haven't seen in the wild yet, is that when you have API first organization that has APIs as primitives that are being used to build assets, that you would be able to like measure like how many projects are using a certain API, and then also like those interfaces that I was talking about, like SDKs that are being reused, like how many teams are collaborating on one SDK. Do you have any kind of collaboration happening on that level, or is it still, are they still just using native APIs? So I think there's like gradually more and more levels of collaboration and more levels of reuse that are possible, and then like, you know, ways to measure that and to get an idea of like how effective the inner sourcing is in an organization. I think there's a lot of possibilities for really interesting stuff. But yeah, I'm also, that's another topic that I'm looking for stories and where people are at. Yeah, but maybe another thing that would be interesting to follow up, like as you go along in your project.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So yeah, that will be quite interesting to see, like if that is measurable, and if it is measurable, then how to do it in quite easy way. I mean, what kind of things you need to place or tooling you need to place to capture all this kind of data. And that's something to interesting.
Do you have an idea how you would measure developer success, as in like business success through developer work or something like that? Do you have ideas for that, or?
Yeah, I mean, technically speaking, or frankly speaking, it could be quite early days, I can say, because now we are in the mode of enabling the tools, so
yes,
we can create the ecosystem properly that can attract the internal developer, as well as when you have the partner portal that will actually enable the business partner to create or to gain the business objective as fast as possible. Because right now, if you don't have the API ready for the business partner, then just imagine like the time, the lead time that they are taking to complete the integration flow completed, or to gain the access that you have actually. So as I said, like not always probably when I hear the terms monetization, it's not always the transactional based. Like for every API you're making money. It's all about
No.
I mean, it's like the business value you're creating by enabling those APIs. I mean, by enabling to giving this all the access to those APIs to your partner, so they can start the business or to making a business quite fast rather than having a loan.
I did a blog post a little while ago about developer success as a combination of developer experience, user experience, as in application experience, and value exchange. But I was thinking further about it, and I think that's focusing too much on transactional, like APIs that are about value transactions, where I think that there's like an ecosystem value also that you are creating with APIs, and then and at some APIs you might actually not want to charge for or force a transactional relationship, because you're actually trying to grow the ecosystem. So it's a really interesting field. And you were hinting at that, thinking way ahead, how are we going to make this a sustainable thing? So if you open something up for free, how do you make sure that you want to keep doing this, because you don't want to close stuff once you've opened it up?
Exactly.
So there's I think a lot of really interesting questions that will need to be answered. And yeah, I know we're not even talking about AI starting to consume APIs, and then it completely goes wild. How do you what kind of business cases do you allow for? How do you identify those? There's a lot of work that we'll have to do as an industry, I think, to figure this all out.
And I was part of one of the chats, so that topic was kind of a API monetization or API productizations, and everybody 6 or 7 different organizations from different domain, few from banking, few from retail, few from car manufacturing. So they all talk about the API monetization is not about the transaction one. Few of them are, of course, transactional one, because for example, Twilio, they have to do it. But for most of them, is basically they are selling the service through an API. So it's not that they're charged for the API call, but it's basically the service they're providing. And I think the most of the company nowadays, actually, or organization, you can say, so they are focusing on the service rather than selling the actual product. I know there is a big car company, so they sell cars, but they're also planning to sell services to other organizations. So that's how they're actually leveraging the power of API to scale up their business growth. I mean, that's quite fascinating, actually, I believe.
It's almost crazy how much the industry has been influenced by people trying to copy the API darlings, but and there's several areas where they're really bad examples, because this transactional APIs where you're charging money for a per API call, or you have some sort of cutback on the money transaction that's happening. Those are such exceptions in the broader landscape, and still people are when people come to us, they often are yeah, we want to monetize our APIs. I'm well, okay, yes, but let's first talk about complementary APIs and how are you going to integrate it with your existing billing systems and whatever. And then it's because people have seen the Twilios and they think that's and management has thought we're going to make more money here because there's a new product that we can start selling. And then actually it's not true. There are some cases, but very, very rarely. Yep. What would be your suggestions for someone who's trying to build a vendor neutral portal? Where should they start? And what were the hard things to do?
I think it's again API first. So understand your data model. For example, as I said, of course, one of the basic needs is basically you are actually planning to address multi-gateway solution or multiple API management solution, for example. So get a common model ready, which fits for most of the API gateways. For example, subscription, API security, how you deploy APIs. And then again, you have to think about the model you have in organization level. Like, for example, if there is a domain, there is an architectural model, like all kind of data model that you have in both technical as well as business. So get that sorted. Then start building the API around it so you can manage it, how you tag it, how you manage it, how you link it, everything. So once you have the API, the data model sorted, you have the API creation is done, then you should start thinking about the presentation layer. That's for the dev portal part actually. And I also think like if you have already the API ecosystem in your organization, then you should start getting all those data. Like for example, maybe API metadata, or maybe API subscription data, or API specific sign. You should own the data. You should not keep all those data locked to the vendor. You should all own the data, and then you should start developing the dev portal. So otherwise, if you build it first the dev portal without thinking the evolve of the API gateways or the data, then probably you will doing it the wrong way. Because if you create a model, let's say you create a subscription model that don't fit with the many of the API gateway, then how do you evolve your your journey to the API gateway? So today probably you are using the X, like let's say X API gateway, tomorrow you're going to change to the Y gateway. If that API gateway doesn't support that subscription model or that deployment model, then you cannot evolve. You have to, again, you're going to stick to the same vendor. All idea here is basically to be vendor agnostic, because you should evolve beyond the vendor's requirement. So that's how I think actually.
Those were some really practical ideas, like the data, and then how that can help you to build the backbone of your portal. We have a UX team that's specialized in developer experience. So we often start our engagements with like information architecture workshop to analyze like what are the personas, what are the different information flows that you have to have in your portal. Because you were talking earlier about discoverability and findability. So like one thing is being able to find what you know already exists. Another thing is to be able to discover it when you don't even know that you should be looking for it, but where it's going to save you time. And I think that's a lot combined with like different personas that you need to be able to address in your portal. What I have seen a lot in internal dev portals is that this is like the last thing people start with. It's they start first with the information, like the information structure, and it's very much about the catalog and making the catalog searchable, having good metadata on the catalog. Have you done any kind of UX research about different personas that you have in the organization that might need different type of data, or this is still something that's going to come later?
I think we are working on the UX, but it's not the fully focus. Our current focus is basically to make the API more searchable, or to make it more categorized, because that's not an easy job. Because we have a long list of backlogs of APIs. For example, we know that we have, let's say, 500 APIs, which is already part of the catalog. Those are not tagged with the new tagging system, let's say, part of organization, which domain they are. So we have to clear all those backlogs. So to just have a uniform look and feel in the UI already. So we are addressing those kind of parts right now, because we need to make sure that it's first searchable or discoverable, that you said just like. And then we can actually think about or invest more on those kind of UX point of view, actually, like how to make, because we have a different kind of developer with a different kind of mindset. So we just make sure that everybody feels comfortable about all the terminology we are using in the dev portal, all the way of searching, how the searching works. It should be quite comfortable for all the developer. So they should not find it challenging. Actually, it should really, even if you don't know how to find the API, because there is quite possibly that there is some new joiner in the organization. They don't know the domain structure, everything. So how to make it easy, even if you don't know the organization structure, because it's not easy things to know actually.
Have you done any experiments with golden paths? Like there's something that Spotify is doing that really I think is super fascinating, and I also want to get somebody from their team onto the podcast to talk about this. But they have this idea of a golden path, which is like the most supported way and the most common way of doing a certain thing in the organization.
Yeah.
Do you have something like that?
No, not really. But I just recently I was actually exploring the Spotify dev portal, and they have this kind of thing. So, for example, if you spin up a Kubernetes engine, or let's say if you want to create a REST API through Spring Boot, then they have the template. That is the most easiest way to get a service up and running within few minutes. So that's the golden path you have actually. So I actually got quite impressed about the idea that this is how, because most of the developer who is a newcomer, who is not familiar with the things, should give them something so they can get it started very quickly and get the objective done. And then more complexity use cases for mature user, or once they used to about the most common use cases, for them you have a different level of difficulties, or for specific use cases actually. So right now the answer is no, but it should be there in future, definitely.
Yeah, it's super cool. For me, it reminds me of the way that ants nests organize themselves, where there's nobody centrally planning how things are going to, like where the main roads are going to be, like where most ants walk, but somehow collectively they create this path together. And it reminds me of this, like that it's called stigmergy in biology, and it's super fascinating because like if we can do that as humans, like create this golden paths that everybody follows, that's super interesting. Yeah.
And I think for many cloud providers, they also have this kind of golden path. Like, what is? I mean, they always have a kind of easy example to get you started very quickly without knowing all the in complexity actually. So everybody's following the same thing.
Yeah. On to the future. Based on what you're seeing right now, how is this all evolving? Where is this industry going? And do you think that we have already the dev portal technologies to be able to serve those changes, or what's your feeling about that?
Yeah, so I think most all the organizations around us is basically focused on the more digitalizations actually. Everybody thinking about this thing, how to expose the data and service to user and partners in a more efficient way. And one interesting fact is basically, if you want to know a organization in more detail, probably you cannot ask them like what technology you're working. Probably it's not good to ask probably if you don't have the connection. I believe like if you follow the LinkedIn roles they add, there you get like what technology they're working and what kind of mindset of people they want in their team actually. And one fascinating fact is basically, whenever I see any software engineer role around there is a one common factor or common description is basically, you should know how to design open API specification, which is quite common nowadays. This was the missing part even 3 or 4 years back. People didn't know about. I mean, I talked to many developers who knows how to develop API, but they are not familiar about the open API specification, how to write that. What is the purpose it serves? They're completely not familiar with something. But now you can see that people, even organizations are expecting that people should know before they join the company, so they can jump into the API first mindset, so they can bring the values. I think the key here is basically why they need the API specification. That means they have some dev portal, probably, because that's what it should go there. And if you see, like most of the organization also giving an ad about the integration architect, integration developer, where the API gateway, the API experience is kind of a key requirement. So that means if you see, this is the common trend for different small or big organizations. This is a common trend. Let's invest on API management. And nowadays also the event management is also getting quite popularity, because the resilience is being in the picture, because not all the use cases can be fulfilled by the API, the REST API or Web API. You also need the async API or the event to mitigate different other integration challenges. So everybody wants free floating of data from point A to point B. They just want to have a good reliability or good endurance in the system. And that's why like everybody is actually working on the almost similar. They know like the API first approach, the developer experience, everything is the kind of a key of their success. I think that's why everybody is moving actually. And that's why we have so many gateways in the market, so many API security products in the market, because everybody is actually investing on that part. And probably that's how we are heading, actually, more and more API-centric business. That's I believe.
So, is that also from a business perspective that you see? How do you think the API world will evolve from like a business perspective? Are we going to have more API products that are more like forcing the transactions? Is it going to become more of a kind of a background that's just everywhere, or like there's a friend of mine, Zdeněk Němek, from Superface. He has this vision that basically APIs are going to be like the telephone network, where before you needed to manually plug one thing to another, and you had to make these connections manually. You had to, like, the Cable Girls Netflix video or series talks about that, right? Where people are manually making this plugging. But the switches came along, and this basically became kind of like a background thing. Now we are using these networks daily, but we're no longer aware of them anymore. Do you think that's where APIs are going, or how do you feel about that? And maybe also in connection with AI. Like I saw a demo of someone wiring up an API, like basically just asked ChatGPT, like, can you like do a connection, and it just figured out how to do an API call just without any prompts or anything, which is crazy. Is our APIs becoming kind of like the background information network, like the magic layer that enables all this magic, or do you think that it's going to stay more in the foreground, or what do you feel about that?
No, I think it's basically plays both background thing. All the integration is right now. I mean, as I said, like a couple of years back, even different integration solutions were in place for point-to-point. But right now, I can see like all the integration flow. For example, if you talk about our Ikea, so when you buy a furniture to get it delivered, there is a lots of system involved. So they don't no longer talk to each other within another different way. Everything is talking to the API actually. So the background work is already heavily relying on the API integration. And of course, the front layer, that of course, as I said, like people with different business, they're thinking about to be service-based. And to enable the service-based thing, you have to sell the API. Not transaction selling, I'm talking about enabling the service through an API. So I think API became a kind of a neuron in kind of a full organizations, be it intercomponent integration, be it system-to-system integration, or even to the kind of a front face of an organization to sell the product, to sell the service. Everything is going to via API. And we have, of course, we need the UI, the website, but that's also kind of heavily dependent on the API thing. It's kind of a complete to loose couple layer, front end, back end, and it's talking to API, as well as people are exposing API directly to the users. And that's why you have so much popularity in public portal or partner portal. That's why. So I think it's basically overall landscape of business is basically going to be driven by the API itself.
We're nearing the end of the podcast. What was the highlight for you? Is there something that you're like, this was an interesting thought, or telling the story, I gained a new insight? Is there something that stands out for you?
The most key factor like that I actually guess is basically the customer success stories or the developer success stories they experience actually, because the API development is to serve the business, but it's only fulfilled if you have the developer success. Then only you actually achieve the business objective of creating API, maintaining API, creating a dev portal or the full ecosystem. And of course, I get quite a good insight about the different aspect of developer success, how to measure that, how different teams or all the example that we have given, like how others are thinking about this. Like it's all about the developer success. If you think all the journey that we are doing, all the investment we are doing, the end goal is basically the developer success. And that's is probably quite like it's a kind of a new aspect or a new new way of thinking that I got through this meeting actually.
Okay, so, that's awesome. Yeah, I got it personally. I started thinking about this because of last year's podcast episodes I did around complexity, and like one of the key things there was. And this is why I started driving for developer success is what we need to go for, as in developer success is business success. Because one of the key things I learned was that if you start optimizing for a local factor, you always end up with problems. Because if you optimize for developer experience, if that is your only thing you're optimizing for, you might have very happy developers, but no business success, and then the whole thing just falls apart. And I think, especially in today's economical climate, I think we all need to pay like very good care about the business outcomes that we're providing. So, yeah, I'm really excited about this, and I'm glad. I'm really happy to hear that this is what resonates with you also. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kristof. Yeah, I mean, it's actually good. Constructive discussion, because more we discuss about the thing, more different angle of things we'll get to know actually each other. So I really appreciate that you were actually conducting this conversation and you are sharing with others actually. So that's really great thing actually.
We learned from each other, and thank you for doing the blog post and for publicly sharing your journey with the community. This episode was brought to you by Pronovix. You can learn more about our company at pronovix.com. Thank you for listening. That's it for this episode.